background, but Jesus wants us to start with the idea that God is the landlord and He has created this vineyard that we are to take care of. God has blessed us with so many things that we have been given. So we start off with Isaiah, but then it goes a long ways different than Isaiah did. The story is an allegory of God's very troubled relationship that He has had with His people over the years. And we can see that He has tried to reach out to them, and they have simply refused. But now that story is coming to a climax. That story is coming to a head. The tenants in this story, as Jesus was telling it, they probably thought of the tenants as the Romans. Oh, yeah, it's those Romans who are abusing us. It's those Romans who are occupying the vineyard, and we need to get rid of them. But as Jesus started telling more and more of this story, as He started mentioning especially the servant part of this story, they would have realized that they were the ones that were the tenants. And they were the ones that Jesus was accusing in this story. The sending of the servants and their rejection of those servants would have especially triggered this switch from the Romans to thinking that it was themselves. Because the servants in the Bible are almost always the prophets. When God talks about His servants, He talks about the prophets. Jeremiah chapter 7 talks about, uses this phrase, I send to you my servants, the prophets. And so when they heard that word servant in a sort of a religious story, they would have immediately started thinking about all of the prophets. But in Jeremiah chapter 7, when it says, I sent to you my servants, the prophets, He goes on to say, you would not listen. And Jesus is saying the same thing. And they knew their Bibles. And they knew it very well. And they knew when Jesus started talking about the servants and their rejection of the servants, that they were the tenants in this story. And they began to be upset. And Jesus is saying, not only did you reject the servants, but you have rejected the Son. The abuse of the servants becomes progressively worse. If you read through there, the first one was beaten and sent away. The second one was struck on the head and treated shamefully, and the third was killed. And then it talks about even more. Some were beaten and some were killed. Because this is the way that Israel treated the prophets. And they realized this. People in Jesus' day believed that all of the prophets died a martyr's death. Now in the Bible we only read about 2 of the prophets who died a martyr's death. We don't know how the rest of them died, but they had legends and stories about how all of the prophets, whether it was Isaiah or Jeremiah or Daniel or Ezekiel or whoever, all of them, they believed died a martyr's death. And so the Jews would be going, oh yeah, we understand those people in the past, our fathers killed those people, but we would never do that. It says one was struck on the head. Now, on the head is a very unusual term in Greek and in biblical language, and it possibly reminds us of John the Baptist, because John the Baptist was beheaded, and struck on the head and beheaded are very similar words. And so Jesus might have been talking about John the Baptist when they said, yeah, you killed him too. The owner has one more card up his sleeve, though. He has sent all of his servants to go and collect the fruit that was due to him. But he says, last of all, and that phrase really should remind us that Jesus Christ is God's last best gift to us. The New Testament was written after Jesus, but it's written about Jesus. And there's nothing more to say. Hebrews tells us that Jesus is the epitome of everything that God had to say. He can't improve on His communication after He sent Jesus. And the New Testament is just that explanation of who Jesus was. And we can't go beyond it. He is the last gift that God has to send. And He says, this is my Son, whom I have loved. Now, in Greek, this is an idiom for an only son. He was going to send His only unique Son to them. And we've read this kind of phrase before, back in chapter 1, where we talked about Jesus' baptism. The dove came down and a voice said from heaven, this is my Son, whom I love. And on the Mount of Transfiguration, we read the same thing. The voice from heaven said, this is my Son, listen to Him. Jesus is saying, I am the Son that God sends into the vineyard. And the landowner says, the tenants hopefully will respect him. will take care of him because he is my son. He is exactly like me, and they may respect him. The son's mission is the same as the prophets, as the servants that were sent before. Bring me the fruit that is owed to me. It's the same message. It's the same ministry, the same mission. Well, the tenants recognize the son as the heir, and they wickedly want to get all of the inheritance. I don't know exactly how that would work. You know, if the landowner was dead and the son is dead, hey, we'll inherit it all. Nobody claims it. You know, squatters' rights, we were here. We'll get it all for ourselves. They are envious of what the owner has and what the son has. And Pilate recognizes that the Jews were jealous, envious of who Jesus was, his power, his sway with the people. And a lot of the reason why they wanted to get rid of Jesus was because of their jealousy. They somehow assume that the landowner is dead, and they figure that they hope that killing the son will get them the vineyard. They want it all for themselves, and they're willing to do almost anything to end up with it. And so they assassinate the son, and they throw out his body, and they leave him unburied. You know, we don't leave anybody unburied in our country, and we really don't care much about the dead. You know, but if you die and you don't have any money, you know, the state will pay for a funeral. In their day, leaving a body unburied was a very shameful thing to do. And even poor people, even criminals, they would bury. And here, though, it talks about him leaving unburied, thrown outside the temple, thrown outside the city, and just left there. So then Jesus asks the question, what then will the vineyard owner do? He doesn't really give them a chance to answer. He doesn't wait for them. After all, this question may not seem like silly to us because we know that the vineyard owner is powerful and is alive and still there. But, so far in this story, the vineyard owner hasn't done anything. So far, the vineyard owner has let his servants be beat up. He's let his servants be killed. He's let his son be killed. Maybe the owner doesn't want to do anything. Maybe he can't do anything. Maybe he's just too weak to do anything, and they will survive and they'll live. But suddenly, the landowner is now powerful. For some reason, the landowner has held off, and now he does something. It talks about him being the Lord of the vineyard, and that he will destroy the tenants, and that he will give the vineyard to other people. The landowner isn't impotent. The landowner isn't powerless. And he comes and punishes those who haven't paid him his due. The inheritance still belongs to the son, even though the son has died. The vineyard still belongs to the heir and to his community. Jesus ends the story with a quote from Psalm 118. Do you remember the last time we saw Psalm 118 in this book? They were quoting it on Palm Sunday when they were saying, Hosanna! Hail to the King! That's Psalm 118. But a little ways left after that, we come to our verses. The one that they just hosanna'd is now the rock that is rejected. The stone that has caused them to stumble. But Jesus goes on to quote the psalm and say that that stumbling block will now become the cornerstone or the capstone. He is the chief stone. The psalm that they quoted a few days before, they will quote again when they reject him. But Jesus knows that that isn't the end of it all. This is a picture of what the temple may have looked like. And I don't exactly, we don't quite understand what the chief stone is. It may have been the cornerstone. In buildings, they'd put a stone, down here in the corner somewhere to make sure everything was square upon that place. And if that is the illustration, then Jesus is saying that he is the stone upon which everything that God is going to do is built on. It could also be the capstone, and I blew up that picture to show you the pinnacle of the temple right there.